Evergreen Sermons Online in Pastor Michael Gabbert's series, Spiritual Warfare Made Simple. This message from October 18th, 2020 is entitled, Spiritual Warfare at Home and Work, citing Colossians chapter 3, verse 18 through chapter 4, verse 1.
Before I begin, let me share something for 2 weeks from today. November the 1st is the Sunday before Election Day. And we have set that day apart as something extraordinary, I think. We're going to share the Lord's Supper on November the 1st. Because of obvious reasons, we've not had the Lord's Supper here in months. And so on November the 1st, I'm going to teach a brief message entitled Chaos versus Peace. I don't know what will happen that whole week. I don't know what the election will bring. I don't know. I can't prophesy the future. But I do think that it's going to be a critical moment for those who follow Jesus to sort of recenter and find our way home. And so in the midst of the chaos of our generation, we're going to remember the peace that comes because of what Christ has done for us and in us and what he is planning to do through us. And so the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians that before you come to the Lord's table, that everyone should inventory themselves. They should examine themselves and test their faith. And so it's unusual for me to give you a 2-week runway into a worship service, but I want to ask you if you'll already now begin the process of praying about what God wants to do that day. I will teach briefly, but the Lord's Supper will be the central act of worship that we share on November the 1st. And so prepare yourself and ask that God prepares all of us so that day will be an extraordinary time together. We will do this in a way that is safe and sanitary, and you'll see when we get there how we're going to do that. But I think it's going to be a really special day in the life of Evergreen, and I want you to prepare yourself for that time. November the 1st, the Lord's Supper. John Gardner was the founding chairman of Common Cause. And he said that it is a rare and high privilege to have a ministry, a work where you get to help other people understand the difference that they can make, not only in their own lives, but in the lives of others, simply by giving of themselves. He tells a story of an old man that he met one time, a cheerful old fella who had a unique way of introducing himself to people. He had a question that he used for a starting conversation. Not the typical, how are you, where do you work, what do you do for a living, those kinds of questions. This old man asked a bit of an unconventional question. He would meet people and greet them with this question: what have you done that you believe in and are proud of? It seems that it was an unsettling question for people who find their self-esteem built on their wealth or their family name or their exalted job title. But he was not particularly a fierce interrogator. He loved all kinds of answers. He was delighted by a woman who once answered, "I'm doing a good job raising 3 children." He met a cabinet maker one time who said, "I believe in good workmanship and I practice it." Another woman said, "I started a bookstore and it's the best bookstore for miles around." The old man's comment was, "I don't really care how they answer. I just want to put the thought into their minds. They should live their lives in such a way that they can have a good answer. Not a good answer for me, but for themselves. That's what's important. What have you done that you believe in and that you're proud of?" It is a way of looking at life that acknowledges that there's something else going on besides the ordinary details of daily life. I began a series 2 weeks ago, just a brief series on spiritual warfare, but not a series about angels and demons and faraway places in deep, darkest Africa. I wanted us to look at spiritual warfare from the standpoint of what it means to live a life in submission to Jesus Christ in the ordinary circumstances, the everyday routines of our life. That's actually where spiritual warfare takes place. We get caught up talking about spiritual warfare, and we think that there are angels and demons, and it's some sort of esoteric, super spiritual kind of event. But the reality is that spiritual warfare is the battle to be like Jesus in the very ordinary realms of our lives. 2 weeks ago, we talked about that battle in ourselves, the struggle between the new man that we are becoming and the old man that we are trying to starve out. That old man loves to put temptation in our way. He loves for us to be dragged down into old default settings that put us into cycles of behavior that are not pleasing to the Lord. There is a battle inside of us, and it is a spiritual battle. We lose sight of that fact when we think, well, I just need more self-discipline. I just need to turn over a new leaf. I just need to make a resolution. The reality is, it is a spiritual battle, and it is only won by utilizing spiritual resources. Our time spent with Jesus, His Word embedded in our lives. Last week we saw Paul in the 3rd chapter of Colossians move from the believer's inner life to the believer in his relationships with his church family. We talked about spiritual warfare in the context of church life. You understand that the Bible teaches us that the incredible relationship, the tangible, visible love relationship shared by members of a church, that is what gives credibility to the gospel. Jesus said, the world will know you belong to me when they see how you behave toward one another, when they see your love for one another. So it is natural to assume that the enemy, as a method of spiritual attack, would do whatever he can do to break up the relationships that go together to make a church. It is spiritual warfare that requires our use of spiritual resources so that we are careful to protect the relationships that we have with each other. Listen, just real quickly, look to the left, look to the right. You know what you just saw? Sinners. They're everywhere. But you know what? We've been given spiritual resources in Christ to come into this place as a family with all of our baggage and all of our stuff and all of our shortcomings, and we get better. We become more like Jesus specifically because we are in this context. We breathe this common air. It's natural for this to be a place of spiritual warfare because the enemy hates what happens when the people of God gather and present themselves before the throne of grace. Spiritual warfare inside of us, spiritual warfare in our church family. But then we're going to go to the closing verses of Colossians chapter 3. This is such a cool chapter because Paul takes us from the inner battle of warfare to the church battlefield of warfare, and now he's going to finish by talking about the two other primary battlefields of warfare for the Christian life, and that is in our homes and at our jobs. You say, well, it's a lot cooler if you talk about spiritual warfare in Africa or in China or somewhere like that. Yeah, it's a lot cooler, but the reality is almost 100% of your battles and my battles are going to be fought within ourselves, within our church, within our home, or within our job site. So that's where we need to learn how to bring spiritual resources to bear on the relationships that we have and the things that we do, because that's where we win the battle. Our own personal sphere of influence. It is true, we can do battle across the globe by prayer. We can be engaged by calling God's Spirit into every involvement that we know by reports of what the gospel is doing across the globe. But most of our spiritual battles are won or lost at home, at the job, in our church, in ourselves. So Paul takes us on this journey. I'm going to speak about the home this morning. I asked Diane, I told her, I said, listen, babe, I'm preaching on really how to be a Christian at home. And, you know, if you get sick Whatever you need to do, you just throw up in your purse. You cannot leave. Do not walk out in the middle of the sermon, okay? I just can't afford that. So she's committed to stay right here. She's sitting next to two of my adult children, and so just talk amongst yourselves. Okay? Now, let's look and see what Paul has to say. The 3rd chapter of Colossians. He's taken us through the internal battle in our own lives. He's taken us through the battle in our church life. Beginning in verse 18, he's going to talk about Christ in our homes. He's going to talk about how to win this battle against the enemy who wants to come in and destroy our homes. He starts with these words, verse 18. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Did you feel all the oxygen just go out of the room? He's not going to teach on that verse. Oh, yes, I am. Verse 19, husbands, love your wives and don't be bitter toward them. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they won't become discouraged. All right, let's stop with those 4 verses, verses 18 through 21, and look at what Paul has to say about a Jesus follower and his family. He starts by telling us that the duties in the home are reciprocal. Now, Paul doesn't typically like real complicated exhortations. Now, I know that some of what Paul teaches in the New Testament is hard to understand. If you're in our ladies' Bible study, for example, and you're going through the book of Romans right now, there are times when you're trying to make sense of what Paul is saying in the book of Romans, and your mind just goes, I get that. Even the Apostle Peter in his writings said, our brother Paul, he writes about some pretty deep stuff. But by and large, what Paul loves to do best is he loves to just give real straightforward exhortations. He wants to give us bullet points. And that's what he does here. He gives 4 little sentences that speak about all of the relationships in a family life. Husband to wife, wife to husband, parent to child, child to parent. 4 statements. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. 2, husbands, love your wives and don't be bitter toward them. 3, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. 4, fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they won't become discouraged. Let's break this down. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. This word submit causes people's minds to explode because our culture is constantly changing what words mean so that they can screw with the meaning of the text. Let's talk about this. Wives, submit to your husbands. First of all, before we look at that word submit, let's capture the phrase at the end, as is fitting to the Lord. In other words, what Paul is suggesting is that a wife is supposed to fulfill her role in the marriage in a way that brings honor to Christ. The word submit is not a word of inequality. It is not a word of second-class citizenry. It is also not a word that is absolute. In other words, the phrase, as is fitting to the Lord, means that, ladies, if your husband wakes up on Monday morning and says, listen, we're a little short on the money in the bank account this week, and so I'm going to go rob a bank today. I need you to drive me. No, I'm not going to help you rob a bank. Submit, woman. No, it's not an absolute term. It doesn't mean that you do anything. It means that you relate to your husband in ways that are fitting to the Lord, in ways that honor Jesus. Okay? Now let's talk about that. This boogeyman word, submit. Wives, submit to your husbands. Here's what you've been told. Christianity is a patriarchal religion. It puts men in power over women. Women are treated as second-class citizens. They are devalued and treated as property. There is that thing happening somewhere in the world, but that is not biblical Christianity. Well, wives, submit to your husbands. What does that mean? Well, let's talk about the word. The word submit does not mean that you're groveling in the dirt with somebody's boot on your neck. That's not what the word means. In fact, the Latin translation of this word is from Greek, but as it was translated, particularly in the Middle Ages, into Latin, the word that they use to capture the meaning here is a word that is related to the word mission. What? It's related to where we get the term Mrs. What does it mean? It's a word that means fulfill the missing parts in the puzzle. Find the mission God created you for. Let's go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. God created everything. Let there be light. God created the land. He filled the seas with water. He created the beasts of the land. He put fish in the water. He put birds in the sky. Every step of the way, he said, it's good. It's good. Man, look at that. That's good. Then he created man. From the dust of the earth, he molded him, breathed life into him, and he said, he's good. And then he said, but there's something here that's not good. The man is alone, and that's not good. And so out of the man, he shaped a woman, and he brought her alongside. And the Hebrew of those early chapters, of those first two chapters of Genesis, paint the picture of God bringing a missing piece into a puzzle. I'm notorious in my household when there is a crossword, a jigsaw puzzle on the dining room table. You know, one of those puzzles that people work on over several days, usually like over Christmas or over Thanksgiving, and there's a 1,500 piece puzzle. I'm notorious for stealing a piece. Because then I'm the hero. Because at the end, they're like, oh, where's that piece? And I'm like, oh, here it is. Dunk. And it completes the picture. You ever seen a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle, missing just one piece right in the middle? It doesn't matter how beautiful the picture is. It doesn't matter what it's a picture of. You look at it and you go, all of that, there's a piece missing. That's what God did in marriage. He looked at Adam and he goes, man, this is good. But it's not finished. It's not complete. Now, if you're single, the temptation is to say, well, yeah, whatever, look at me. Listen, God gives you, if you're single, you're in one of two situations. You're not married yet, or God has supernaturally made you complete in and of yourself. It is a brilliant thing that God does for someone who is perpetually single, to give them a completedness that can only come from His Spirit. So you are either complete in yourself, or God is still in the process of bringing that relationship to you that will provide that missing piece. This word, submit, is related to mission. What it means is, wives, find out how you fit as the missing piece in this marriage relationship so that your family honors Christ and is whole before the Father because of what you contribute to this relationship. Submit is not a statement of slavery. It is not a statement of abuse. It is not the idea that you are second class and you just have to just take what you get. It is a statement of honor, saying, find out your place of how you complete things in this family. You have an incredible gift and opportunity in Christ to be the fulfillment of what God is doing in your family. So, wives, let's translate it this way. Wives, in a way that honors Jesus, find your fulfillment by completing what God is doing in your home. The enemy wants us to have a screwed up idea about marriage relationships, because the family is where God does most of the work of discipleship in the life of believers. And if he can damage our families, he can short circuit our discipleship. Well, let's talk about the men. Verse 19 says, husbands, love your wives. Look at this. Husbands, love your wives and don't be bitter toward them. Now let's talk about both of those phrases. Love your wives. The word love there is the word agape. It's a word that means self-sacrificing love. So when Paul says, husbands, love your wives, what he is suggesting is have an attitude toward your wife that is willing to pay any cost to meet her needs and bring her contentment. Ooh, whoa. Pay any cost to bring her contentment. She's never content. Maybe she would be if you loved her like Jesus. See, Paul, this is Colossians, but over in Ephesians, Paul says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. How did Christ love the church? Oh, that's right. He died for her. Does your wife understand that you would do literally, I know that's a word that's misused a lot in our language. Does your wife understand that you would do literally anything to protect her and to provide for her and to care for her and to help her walk with Jesus in a way that allows her to be the woman God designed her and created her to be? Does she see that in the way you speak to her and treat her? You see, Paul said, husbands, love your wives, but then he added this, and don't be bitter toward them. That word bitter is in some translations translated, don't be harsh. In other words, don't treat her as a subject. Rather, meet her needs regardless of the cost to yourself. See, here's what the enemy does in our generation. He teaches wives that the word submit is somehow a demeaning idea. And you can almost hear in a female voice, I'm not going to submit to that man. But we've got men who also don't understand what God is doing in the family. And you can hear it in a man's voice. Woman, you just submit. That's your place. Let me tell you something. Both of those attitudes are unchristlike. Wives, find the honor of completing the puzzle that is your home. Husbands, treat your wives as the gift from God that they are. Well, Pastor, you just don't know my husband. Pastor, you just don't know my wife. I know. But I do know the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm telling you, he's the answer to your struggles in your home. Now think about this. We have situations. Let's just use that language. We have situations in our home. We have conflicts. We have disagreements. But because we haven't trained our minds to view our home life as a battlefield in spiritual warfare, we try and deal with those conflicts, those situations, those struggles. We try and deal with them with human resources. If we could recognize that when a husband and a wife are at odds with each other, the only person who's winning is the enemy who's standing in a corner laughing his head off. This is spiritual conflict. This is spiritual warfare. Our marriages would show improvement if we would bring spiritual resources to bear on the circumstances, on the situations. Well, I just can't do anything right for her. Well, he doesn't appreciate anything I do. Okay, Here's a radical idea. Pray for them. Pray for your husband. Pray for your wife. Occasionally, I don't know, pray with them. Why? Because your relationship is a spiritual battle. We have spiritual resources with which to do battle, but because we don't recognize it as spiritual battle, we don't bring all those resources in. We think that our struggles at home are somehow disconnected to everything else. The enemy is attacking at your home base. Bring Jesus into the conversation. Bring the Word of God into the conflict. Husbands, don't be harsh. Don't be bitter toward your wives. In other words, let's just make this real simple. Either be nice or shut up. You always side with the wives. You know, that's what I'm going to get. You always side with the wives. Yes, I do, a lot of times, because God has called us to be the leaders. We are responsible for the atmosphere in our homes. Husbands, love your wives and don't be bitter toward them. Well, now he moves from the husband-wife relationship to the parent-child relationship. Look at what he says next. In verse 20, he says, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord." Think about that. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. All right, let's talk about that. In this term children, it refers to any child living at home or still under parental guidance. Okay? Let's qualify it. Children, obey your parents in whatever it is that they say that you like. No. Children, obey your parents in everything. Pastor, you have no idea what my parents are like. Yeah, I know. They're horrible. That's kind of how it goes. But here's the thing. Do you know what the parent-child relationship is designed to do? It's designed to teach children how to obey authority. Now, we have a generation of young adults right now who have lost their minds, and they're out burning buildings and crashing cars because nobody ever taught them how to listen to authority, how to submit to authority. You say, my parents are, they're too hard. Okay, we're going to talk about that in just a minute when I talk to the parents. But right now, let me talk to the kids. The parent-child relationship is designed to help you learn how to accept authority. Because as an adult, one thing you're going to discover is there are times when God gives us instructions for something to do, and He doesn't, imagine this, He doesn't explain Himself. And we have to learn how to follow the authority that God has ordained in our lives, because the lesson is teaching us how to follow God. Look at what it says here. You might say, well, I'm talking here mostly to children and particularly to teens. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, I mean, if you are a believer, if you have a walk with Jesus yourself, look at what it says here. It says, children, obey your parents in everything. Why? For this pleases the Lord. Do you know that's the same word that shows up in Matthew chapter 3 where Jesus was baptized and a voice from above comes and the Father says, "This is my Son in whom I am pleased." It's the same word. In other words, because Jesus was willing to submit to what He was called to do in His life, He was pleasing to the Father. So as you obey your parents in everything, you are pleasing to Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, your motivation for obeying your parents is not just that they said it, it's because it brings pleasure to Jesus to see you live your life that way. Children, obey your parents in everything. Say, man, that is so hard. Well, sure it's hard. It's the hard that makes it great. It's what makes you into the kind of human being that can then turn around and have the responsibility of authority over your children. But he doesn't leave it at that. Fathers, do not exasperate your children so that they won't become discouraged. Let's talk about two words there. The first one is exasperate. Some translations use the word embitter or provoke. Do not provoke or irritate your children. It's a word that means don't overreact as a parent and harass your children. In other words, don't nag them all the time. Do not say amen. How do we exasperate our children? Let me just give you some options. One is through overprotection. Now let me talk to you. If you're a helicopter parent, we live in this really weird generation of people who are determined that their kids are not going to have any struggles in any way, and they're going to come in, swoop in, be the superhero who saves the day. You got to quit that. Listen, I talked to a friend of mine who's a professor at the university level, and he said something happened to him in the last school year that's never happened to him before in his entire career. He had a mother call him to complain about a grade that her sophomore in college son got on an assignment. Do you know when I was in college, I would have been absolutely mortified if my mother had called one of my professors? I mean, come on. We have this idea that children need us to smooth the way and cover everything. The reason we've got the generation that we see right now on television is because we have parents who never let them experience anything. They were told, they were raised up with the idea that you should never be uncomfortable. Nobody should ever offend you. Nobody should ever say anything to make you upset. Do you know the University of Michigan has they have created a room where if you are too stressed out by the politics, by the events of the day, if you get caught up in current events and you're too stressed, you have permission to not go to class, and you can come to this room, which is a safe space filled with puppies. You know, I grew up with a dad. I could crash my bike. I could have road rash all the way up the side of my body. I could be bleeding, and my dad would say, rub some dirt on it. You got to quit bailing out your kids all the time. The world is not full of puppies. The world is a hard place, and we are not doing them any favors to overprotect them. It's okay for them to understand that sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes they don't get their way. We can frustrate our children. We can embitter them with overprotection, but also with favoritism. I've never understood how parents can identify one kid who gets all of the attention at the expense of the other kids in a family. You can frustrate your children with unrealistic goals. Do not push them to achieve the things that you were unable to achieve, and you're determined that somebody's going to get it done. You can hurt them by a lack of affection, but you can also hurt them by a lack of standards. Don't let them get by with a participation medal. Make them earn what they get in life. You can hurt them by excessive criticism the same way you can hurt them by excessive neglect and excessive discipline. It says, that's the rest of the sentence. It says, fathers, do not exasperate, do not harass, do not irritate your children so that they won't become discouraged. The word discouraged there is a word that means to be listless, sullen, and have the resignation of a broken spirit. You ever seen a horse full of life and energy and power? But you put a bit in its mouth and you put a shoulder on its back and he can run like the wind under control of the rider. That's a horse that has been trained, but he hasn't lost anything in his spirit. But you've seen another horse, a horse that walks with his head down and just sort of drags along and never looks up, never acknowledges. That's a horse whose spirit has been so broken, there's nothing of life left in him. We have the choice as parents to do that with our kids, to train them in a way where they bring the enthusiasm and the energy that they have in life, but we bring it into control so that it advances the cause of Christ. Or we can just berate them until we have nothing but a broken human being shuffling along behind us as we go from place to place. Now, in the same way that a wife finds the way to fulfill the completion of the relationship, and that matches a husband who is loving his wife with no account of the cost. In the same way that the husband and wife relationship works, this parent-child relationship works in the same way. Your children aren't obedient? Let's examine your parenting styles. Your parents are too hard? Let's examine your obedience styles. And what happens is, when we understand that this is a spiritual battle, well, now we begin to bring spiritual resources into the battle. Parents, do you pray for your children every single day? Children, teenagers, do you pray for your mom and dad? I don't mean pray against your mom and dad. I mean, pray for your mom and dad. Do you know the best thing that could happen in your home is for your mom and dad to get caught up in their pursuit of Jesus Christ? Do you know the best thing you can do for your parents is for you to get caught up in your pursuit of Jesus Christ? Do you know that the home is the primary discipleship venue for human beings? It's not the church. We have children's ministry. We have student ministry. We have even college ministry. But this is not a place where you drop off your kids so that they get their spiritual dosage. We're simply here to undergird you, to strengthen what you do. You are the primary disciple makers in your home. Your kids are your responsibility. Raise them up to follow Jesus. Now, I understand there are specific situations that complicate these things, and I can't speak to every possible scenario, but I'm laying out the ideal here. But I will tell you this, no matter what your specific circumstances are, an extra dose of Jesus will always move you forward. A Jesus follower and his family, our motives are spiritual. That is, we recognize that all of this is a battleground for spiritual warfare. And if we began to see our homes as battlefields, then we would be reminded more often to bring spiritual resources into play. Don't park your Christianity at the church and go home and try and do home life without Jesus. What about a Jesus follower in his job? In these closing verses of this chapter, Paul uses the language of slaves and masters, but we can bring this into the 21st century and speak of it in terms of employees and employers. Paul has some important things to say to slaves, which we apply to employees, and then he has a fascinating sentence to masters, which we apply to employers. I want you to see how this works out in the workspace. Look at verse 22. Slaves, obey your human masters in everything. Don't work only while being watched as people pleasers, but work wholeheartedly, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do it from the heart as something done for the Lord and not for people, knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord. You serve the Lord Christ. For the wrongdoer will be paid back for whatever wrong he has done, and there is no favoritism. He starts by talking about, for the employee, what I would call true motivation. He says, obey, in other words, do what the boss tells you. Have an attitude of responsibility that you will do your job. That attitude of responsibility includes a kind of conscientiousness, a sincerity that goes with hard work. He says here, don't work only while being watched as people pleasers. My first job years ago when I was a teenager, I worked at a grocery store. And we would bag groceries and take them out and put them in people's cars. And we would stock shelves and all the typical stuff that go on in a grocery store. But there were always those guys that you would find, they would be back in the warehouse. And I mean, they would have carved out a little space behind boxes. And they were just killing time. Nobody knew they were there. They were wasting time and not working until the boss showed up and said, hey, get to work. And then they would go work. That's the scenario Paul is painting here. He's saying, don't be the kind of person that only works when somebody is looking over your shoulder. In other words, as a Jesus follower, you ought to have a wholeheartedness to your work life that comes from the fact that you know that you're ultimately doing work for God. Now, I run into this sometimes. People say, man, I have the worst job. I have a terrible boss. It's a horrible workplace. I mean, the people are terrible there. I absolutely understand, and I've had a few of those jobs in my life. But what Paul wants us to understand, again, like at home, the job site is a battlefield for spiritual conflict. In other words, as an employee, he suggests that we don't work for that bad boss. We work with a mindset that recognizes that ultimately Jesus is the one that we're accountable to. In other words, you should be the best employee at your work site. You have a bad boss, you have lousy coworkers, you have a job that's not real good, and yet you have the opportunity within that sphere of influence to work in a way that that makes you obviously different from everybody around you, and it puts Christ on display. Now, you want to change jobs, you want to get out of that job, that is a perfectly reasonable prayer request. Lord, I'd love to move somewhere else. I need a different job. I don't want to work here anymore. Pray about that and ask God to do that. That is a perfectly acceptable prayer request. But understand this as well. For this moment in time, you may be the only person in that sphere of influence, and you're behind enemy lines. I mean, in effect, you've got a boss that's bad, you've got coworkers that's bad, in a job that's bad, and God has put you there for this moment in time because you represent Jesus, and the way you work puts him on display. You can either live down to the level of everybody around you, or you can work like Jesus is your boss, and you can honor him with your effort and your enthusiasm so that you work wholeheartedly. Paul, I love this little sentence that he sticks in here. He says, whatever you do, do it from the heart as something done for the Lord and not for people, knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord. The end of verse 24, you serve the Lord Christ. That's the motivation. That's why you do what you do, and that's why you do it the best that you can do it. Well, nobody appreciates me at my job. Yeah, sometimes it goes like that. But when you're working for Jesus, here's what you do know. Jesus does appreciate it. He keeps tabs. He rewards. When you represent him well, there are rewards that come with that. Well, what if you're the boss? What if you're not the employee, you're the boss? Well, look at chapter 4, verse 1. He says, Masters, deal with your slaves justly and fairly, since you know that you too have a master in heaven. This is what I call true management. He tells the bosses that they are to treat their workers fairly and with justice. Why? Because the boss who is a Christian knows that they have a boss in heaven that they answer to. If we leave our Christianity in the church, if we leave it at home, if we leave it in the car when we go into the workplace, we live as the old man in the workplace, and we're just like everybody else. If you're the boss, you may say this is a bad job, it's a bad company, higher level management. See, if you've got a relationship as an employee to higher level management, but if you have people under your responsibility, your role is to do the best you can to create an atmosphere where those workers that are under your responsibility are treated fairly and justly. You are not to see them as what we call human resources. You are to see them as men and women created in the image of God who need to be recognized as valuable. Again, we forget that the workplace is a spiritual warfare battlefield. Well, once we recognize that there is a spiritual battle going on at my workplace, we can remember to bring all of the spiritual resources we have available into that situation. When was the last time you prayed for your boss? When was the last time you prayed for your employees by name, one at a time? Do you know what they're going through in their family lives? Are they valuable enough to you that you've invested enough time to know who they are and what they need and how you can pray for them? Listen, you want to disarm conflict in the workplace? You bring an employee into your office and you say, listen, I know you're struggling with some stuff and I don't really know what it is. So I'm here to ask you, is there any way I can pray for you in your family life or your private life, or is there anything that you want to share? Because I will make a commitment. I know Jesus Christ, and I meet with him in the mornings before I come to work, and I want to pray for you if you'll let me do that. Do you know that disarms conflict? Now, what's required for that? Well, it would help if you would, act like Jesus along the way, so that when you say, I'd like to pray for you, they don't look at you like, really? You pray? Yeah. Masters, treat your employees, he says, your slaves, treat your employees fairly and justly, because you remember you also have a master that you answer to. Listen, whether this is in your life, your personal life, there's spiritual warfare there. In your church family life, there's spiritual warfare there about the relationships that we share. Your home life, your job life. We haven't talked at all about angels and demons. But if we could understand these realms of where spiritual warfare takes place, that's when angels and demons come into the story. Because when you act like Jesus in your home and transformation begins to happen, when you act like Jesus in your workplace and he gives you an influence that is supernatural, what happens is angels stand and stare in awe, and demons run and hide. We have the resources to win in spiritual warfare. I saw a shirt a number of years ago. I wanted to have it. I didn't feel like I was worthy of it at the time, and so I didn't get it. But it shows a pair of blue jeans that have holes in the knees and they're worn out. And the shirt simply said, "When I drop to my knees, hell trembles." Man, I want to be that guy. I want hell to shake in their boots when I enter the battlefield. But the battlefield is not for me right now. It's not in India or China. I can pray about situations there that I know about, and I can ask God to be involved. But the battlefield for me is in my life, in my church, in my home, at my work. And if I win battles for Christ on those battlefields, the world changes because of me. I read a story this week that came out of a golfing magazine. It tells the story of what they called one of golf's immortal moments. Apparently, there was a Scotchman who traveled to the United States as an ambassador for the game of golf. He was introducing it and trying to bring it to America. And he had an audience with President Ulysses Grant to introduce and demonstrate this new game called golf. Carefully, he placed a ball on the tee, wound up and took a mighty swing with the club. The club hit the turf and scattered dirt all over the president's beard and everybody standing near him, while the ball waited placidly on the tee unmoved. The story says again the Scotsman swung and again he missed. President Grant waited patiently through 6 tries and then quietly said these words: "There seems to be a fair amount of exercise in this game, but I fail to see the purpose of the ball." Your life and mine. We get so busy, so caught up. Sometimes we miss the point of it all. You see, in life, there seems to be a fair amount of exercise, but sometimes we miss the ball altogether. You can rush nonstop through your day, scrambling from one thing to the next, just trying to keep your head above water, only to fall into bed at night so that you can get up the next day and do it again and again and again and again. Only you're never actually hitting the ball off the tee. You're never actually living the life God created you to live. The enemy, he just wants you spending all your energy, exhausting yourself in your schedule. He just doesn't ever want you to hit the ball on the tee. Jesus didn't make you to run around like a chicken with its head cut off. He made you to be his representative and to change the world within the sphere of influence that he has assigned uniquely to you. If we learn how to fight spiritual battle in ourselves, if we learn how to protect the credibility of the gospel by protecting the relationships of the people in our church, if we learn how to make Jesus Christ the center of our homes and our marriages, if we learn how to serve with faithfulness and enthusiasm in our workplaces because we know we're serving Jesus, then we're hitting the ball off the tee. Don't let your life just be a fair amount of exercise. Don't miss the point of it all. You were put here to change the world, and you can. You change it by making the world different in all the places where you invest your life. And you put Jesus there, and you win the battle with spiritual forces. Remember to use spiritual resources in all the aspects of where you live your life. If you don't know Jesus Christ, that's the starting place. You must have a relationship with him, because these spiritual resources that I talk about, they don't come until the Spirit of God resides in your life. We'd love to introduce you to Jesus. Maybe you have Jesus in your life, but But man, you've left him compartmentalized over here, and he's your Sunday buddy. But he's not active in your home life. He's not active in your job life. You don't take him everywhere and make him a part of everything you do. Maybe it's time for you to just come kneel at the throne and say, Lord, I want to take inventory. I want you to be in charge of every part of my life. Maybe you need to be a part of a church. Listen, for all of the weird people that are here, God has deployed us into this place because this is a context in which He chips the rough edges off of each of us and makes us more like Jesus. You need to be in a church, not just attending a church, not just casually attached to a church. You need to be in the heart of a church. You need to be in a covenant relationship with other believers so that you invite them into your messy life, but you accept the responsibility to step into their messy lives, because together we are becoming more like Jesus. Christianity is a group project. If you need to know how to be in a church, we'd love to share that with you. We're going to have just a moment where we sing. It won't be long. But our pastors, some of them will be here, and they're available to you. They'll pray with you. They'll talk with you, whatever you need. Maybe you want to just come and kneel by yourself. Maybe you want to take somebody by the hand and ask them if they'll come pray with you. Maybe you just need to come when you see somebody praying and you need to come kneel beside them. Whatever you do business with Jesus. Let's make Him central so that all of the battlefields that make up our life, we win because we put Jesus front and center with everything that we do.